We have a short time to go. And right now, according to my clock, it's the top of the hour, so that we stay on schedule. My name is Ray Arce, and I'm the room captain for Hall 2 for this first day. So everybody, welcome to this first event for human factors in diving. And I would like to introduce our first speaker, Matthijs. I think I said that wrong again. I think he'll correct me. But Mr. Smith is a avid recreational diver, and he happens to be the president of one of the oldest dive clubs in Melbourne, Australia. I encourage you to listen to his presentation on how we can bring human factors into our dive clubs and maybe change some of the ways that we solve problems there. So over to Matthijs.
Great, and thank you very much for the introduction. It's quite a privilege to be here. I have to say, when I looked at the backgrounds of some of the speakers, I feel, forgive me, it's not a dad dive joke, but I feel a little bit out of my depth because I'm really just a recreational diver and just do it for fun, and I don't do any particularly extreme things. But last year, while Melbourne was in lockdown, I did become president of the Victoria Sub-Aqua Group, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And at the same time, we were looking for speakers. I reached out to Gareth, and he very kindly offered to present at our dive club. And it turned out he was running one of his online courses, which I jumped on. And in fact, another club member jumped on, and we got very, very enthusiastic about what we had learnt on the course. And, you know, in the conversations we were having, both in the class and outside the class, we were very keen to start introducing and embedding some of those things into our club. So just to tell you a little bit about myself.
Matthijs, this is Brian.
Yes?
You're going to need to share your screen here on stage as well.
Okay, well, there's no buttons that I've got here. I've just got my presentation up. So
let's see.
Well, let me see if I can go back to where okay, hang on a sec. I'm here.
There we go.
Okay, oh, sorry, I thought it carried over from the backstage.
And you can keep on going.
Hang on, slideshow. How's that? Can you see that?
Fabulous.
Excellent. Okay. So this is a little bit about my background, and I actually did start diving a very long time ago. This is my first dive qualification from 1982. As you can see, I sort of had a lot of attitude as well as my mum's jumper. And as part of my dive medical, you can see in circle I wasn't the best candidate. I had circled from Dr. Gerard that I was giving up smoking, which I did 25 years later. But to give you some idea of the training in those days, in actual fact, I started off being trained as a snorkel diver. And I can tell you, that was probably one of the most challenging dive qualifications I've been through. It was, you know, we had to do full ditch and recovery. There was quite comprehensive water skills. And so by the time you jumped on scuba, your comfort in the water and your comfort with your gear was very high. And actually scuba seemed like a doddle after the snorkel certificate. To tell you a little bit about the Victorian Sub-Aqua Group, as was mentioned, it is actually one of the longest running independent dive clubs in the world. It was established in 1954. And given, you know, that's not long after scuba gear was invented by Jacques Cousteau, there can't be many older ones. This is a profile of some of the things we've been up to. That center picture at the top is helping the Victorian police recover a body in 1956. There's a lot of wrecks around the coast, and people are happily looking for various wrecks and anchors and things like that. On the right-hand side is some of the innovation and trying out various oxygen systems. And in actual fact, the woman on the top right-hand side is the one below, who's Jan Watson, who's an avid diver and has been for probably 50 years. And she still dives. She's in her 80s. I actually went on a dive with her New Year's Eve a couple of years ago, and she's quite extraordinary, very, very lively, and very astute. And this is also showing people trying out some of the older equipment that was used in scuba diving. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is the true map of the world, and with Australia in its rightful place in the centre of the globe. Melbourne is actually based down the southern end, so we're a long way from the Great Barrier Reef. Very temperate water, but as I'll show you in a sec, there's some really quite exquisite diving that goes on. And I did just throw in a few photos of what we have here. A lot of very, very good pier dives with a lot of wildlife. In the center is a picture of a spider crab. We have the spider crab that was featured on the Blue Planet with David Attenborough, occurs in the middle of every year. But yeah, absolutely terrific variety of diving that you can do here. Everything from wreck dives to some incredible wall dives with incredible limestone formations, and then a lot of macro photography. And in actual fact, at one of the sites, Blair Gowrie is quite famous for macro, and one of the members of our clubs, I think, found over 100 different species of nudibranchs. So one of the bad things I'd say about Melbourne, certainly in the last 2 years, is we've had one of the most onerous and restrictive lockdown procedures. We are now in our 6th lockdown since the COVID outbreak, and you can see it's actually added up to over half the time since the virus started making its way around the planet. We are currently in a lockdown now, and in actual fact, I'm even worse. I'm in quarantine, that we are not allowed to leave our property for another week and a half because my son was at a tier 1 exposure site. So this is really curtailed, obviously, a lot of diving, because it's been illegal to be anywhere near the water if you're not within 5 kilometers of it, and has had an impact on the enthusiasm that we had of bringing in human factors into our dive club. It's kind of hard to do if you're not diving that much, and so that's clearly been a serious challenge with it, but it is a really critical part of the club. And just moving on to the next slide, you'll see why. So this is a close-up of what Melbourne looks like, and just to give you some idea, hopefully you can see the arrow, but we have obviously this enormous bay. There's a lot of incredible piers around these areas here. There's a huge channel that runs through here, which is the remnants of the Yarra River. There's a big limestone wall that runs here, and then around this area we have what's called the ship's graveyard, which is tens of shipwrecks to go diving on. So an incredible variety. But anyone who knows boats will know that if you have a bay like this and a small heads like this, you have a lot of water moving back and forth along here, and some pretty challenging currents. Equally, this water out here is Bass Strait, which can be a pretty lively bit of water. So it's not the easiest diving in the world. You do need to know what you're doing. And with our club, we're primarily diving off the back of small boats, as you can see here. Now, these boats are very well configured for scuba diving. They have dive ladders. They're fully equipped with oxygen. We're in the process of getting defibrillators on all of the boats. They are set up, but they're small boats. They're not the easiest things to get on and off of. And this is one of the things why the club is very committed to safety. In fact, our club motto is safety in diving. And that has been fortunate for me, because it's meant it's been quite a rich environment to be able to start bringing in some of these ideas. But as I said, it's a little bit challenging to bring in changes in behaviours and reinforce them if you're not doing much diving of its own. There's not a lot of lessons to be learnt and talked about. So I got creative and started. Actually, one of the things I did want to mention was, which did come out of the dive course, and I think Gareth will remember this. We had a wooden weight belt award, which was, kind of fun, prize that was awarded every annual general meeting for the biggest stuff up that had occurred during the year, and there's a lot of banter and things. And when I came in as president, I just didn't feel particularly comfortable about it. And it's not that, you know, I'm a complete killjoy. I used to get invited to parties, but I felt it sort of set the wrong behaviour, because the reality is nobody really enjoyed getting those awards. And while they were a little bit of fun, you know, there was an undercurrent there. And I felt, particularly having done a lot of the human factors training, that they would drive a behaviour where people would hide things where they stuffed up. And that is totally counter to what we were trying to generate. So I did actually raise at the committee and had that award removed. And I still agonise whether it was the worst thing to do or not. Ironically, you know, the guy whose boat I went diving on all last summer, halfway through let me know that he actually instigated the award when he was president. But, you know, I felt it was the right thing to do. And I would have to say more recently it's been reinforced, because this is me earlier this year in our buddy check, and anyone who's paying attention will notice the comment that was said to me was quite appropriate, which is, are you going to take your life jacket off before you enter the water? And I did try and remove it as quickly as possible, but it was well and truly embedded in my gear, and I wasn't able to escape the photo opportunity. So I think I would have been the recipient this year of the VSAG Wooden Weight Belt Award. But having said that, like I say, we were a little bit, you know, challenged with trying to bring in these changes of behaviour. So I started using the internet and bringing in some of the opportunities from there, and actually introduced a safety report into our meeting, which we have every month. And really just, if we're not having accidents, well, other people are. I use the Scuba Dive Accidents and Safety Facebook site, and would compile incidents and start talking about them. And this is such a great story. You know, I kind of feel like it is true. But it just shows the power of even what small interventions can do. So one of the themes that came up when I was reading these sites was there were a couple of incidences of people having stuck inflator buttons on their BCD and ending up on the surface, and, you know, people trying to take their gear off, going into star shapes to slow themselves down, all sorts of, you know, advice going around of what you should and shouldn't do. So I talked through a few of these case studies during our club meeting, and then, you know, afterwards sort of raised some lessons and reflections about looking after your gear, some drills you could practice to try and get over it. And just having that discussion, you know, one of the guys said, you know what, and you know, this was a very, very experienced diver, someone who's, you know, been diving 40 years, said, that's happened to me last week. And it happened to the guy I dive with, he was in fact an instructor trainer 2 weeks before that. And, you know, so it became very timely, and we had quite a discussion. In fact, that guy then went on to write an article in our club magazine where he was going through, you know, all the reasons why bits of gear will leak gas, including your BCD, and some of the things you had to do and the drills to practice. And you know, this shows a picture from that article with all the different types of connectors for your low pressure hose going onto BCDs. And, you know, it really became quite a topic of discussion. And I just also throw in, you know, to give an idea of the culture of the club, this was another article from the same magazine talking about the space shuttle, which is obviously a very key case study in terms of, you know, sophisticated events and you know, practices that have meant things that could have been intervened and avoided didn't happen, and an incident blew up from it. Ironically, you know, through all of this, I started practicing low pressure disconnect, something I'd never done previously. And on that dive that was actually at the very beginning of my talk, I actually had a problem with my BCD and low pressure hose. Because I've been doing these drills, I calmly disconnected it, finished off, well, actually went to the surface, but, you know, was controlling my buoyancy just through oral inflation. But, you know, this was really just surfing the internet, putting up something to talk about in the club, and then it turns out it had an impact on some of the things, because we had suddenly started adopting it and seeing how we could use these lessons, in this case someone else's lesson, to improve our own diving. And that was a great story. So, you know, once you're on a roll, what do? Well, you keep doing this. So this was another article that I came across, which obviously I'm not expecting anyone to read it, but it essentially was somebody who was, again, very experienced diver, but got distracted, ended up jumping in with the wrong weights. Didn't turn into an accident, but it's still, you know, were a lot of things that needed to be managed. And the person went through a bit of reflection and posted this article on Dan, and it was a great article. And I thought I'll share this with the club. So I popped it up on our Facebook site, and, you know, just a valuable lesson about the importance of pre-dive checks. And I'd like to get back onto these in a minute, but you know, just talking about normalization of deviance and, you know, many of the themes. Peter Camposano, who's one of the guys in our club, you know, said, thanks, that's great. But the internet is the internet and Facebook is the Facebook. And a guy called Garrett Blake came in with this very helpful contribution of, you know, what does normalization of deviance have to do with anything? Bandied around like steamers at a fair. Just don't distract me. List, schmist. No talking BS rule for 5 minutes before the dive. That's how you do it. And, you know, I mean, now I will point out that Barrett Blake is not a member of our club. And I just ignored this comment when it came up because it was, I just didn't think a particularly constructive way of looking at the world. But I did have a look while I was preparing this. He doesn't even live in Victoria, this guy, and he does seem to go around. In fact, when I spoke to Gareth on this presentation, he's equally been as generous with his constructive comments on some of the human dive reports. But I think it does highlight a really important lesson, and certainly for what I've been doing, which is within a recreational dive club, you know, there's a diversity of people there, and you know, while I'm all hot up and gun ho about safety and bringing in briefs and debriefs and lists and checklists and all this kind of stuff, not everyone's there to do that, and so you do have to think, well, how do you really make it, you know, part of what you do? You can have this as your motto, you can have a lot of people who are passionate about it, but you do have to change the culture and the behaviors. And, you know, it is very much, you know, one of the thematics and one of the things that I really got out of this was, you know, the idea that Gareth always talks about of, you know, just making it easier to do the right thing than the wrong thing, and just make it, you know, normal and not make it stand out. And I, you know, mention the buddy check, because to my mind, I think the buddy check is one of the best platforms to think about human factors. And the reason for that is we're all trained to do it. And, you know, it's the very first thing you do in your open water, the buddy check and your you know, all the various acronyms in different ways. And I would challenge anyone, I'm sure there may be a few people, but all of us get pretty slack at doing it, and have at some stage in our career, you know, eased back or been a bit loose, or, you know, it goes from a proper buddy check where you go through each stage to, you all right? Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, let's go. You know, and the irony is, and you know, I've been thinking about this a lot, but the irony is, it is a really good thing to do. You know, nobody will deny it. And I would say, you know, every time I do it, you know, there would be 1 in 10 times at least where there's something which I've missed, and it's been good that somebody else has run over my kit and picked it up for me. But we don't do it, or you know, it is one of the things that just slips very, very quickly out of good practice. But do people not do it because they think it means they don't look like a good diver? Well, whenever I see anyone doing a buddy check on any of the liveaboard or dive boats that I'm on, I respect them. I think it's, you know, that's great. And you know, so it's not even as though it's people look at it as a demeaning thing. I'm not quite sure which aspect of human nature stops us from doing something that is good practice. We know it's good for us. We get feedback because things get picked up, and actually you look like a better diver when you're on the boat and doing it. But for some reason we kind of slide out of that. It's an interesting habit. Anyway, going on to another aspect of human factors, and this, you know, also came into the club as well, is we do have a lot of very, very experienced guys, well, people in our club. In fact, when I first became president, we had pretty sloppy records on who was members and who weren't members. So I did quite a data search, including trying to collect everyone's qualifications, and so that we had a bit of a profile of what the club looked like. And there were some absolute pearlers there. You know, we had my favourite were 3 people who came in with their highest certification was open water, and they got it in 1976. And so these are guys, they got trained and they've been diving ever since. They are, you know, some of the most skilled divers you will ever come across. I mean, these are people who absolutely know what they're doing. But it's so different to the culture now where there's, you know, wallets full of cert cards. Many of these guys don't, you know, they got trained and then they've learned by diving, and they have, you know, thousands and thousands of dives under their belt, and they are just, you know, the discipline of how they do things. There's a reason why they've been diving 40 years and are still alive. But we bring in a lot of that skill into the club, and this was a day that we had in May this year, which was a configuration day. And again, one of the things, you know, you get trained, you get shown all your gear, and then you go and buy it, and you spend a lot of money and a lot of time on boats looking at what everyone else is doing and think, oh, that's a good idea, I'll try that. But nobody really sits down and says, this is what works and what doesn't work. And this was pure human factors, because these, like I say, these 2 guys are Peter Mosser, which is this guy here, and Jim Dyer here. They are instructor trainers. They've been diving and teaching people forever. When you see their rigs, they have nothing on them. They are absolutely stripped down minimum. Everything that they need is there, but nothing else. And this was, again, putting your equipment where you need it, putting your gauges so you can see them, having your hoses come under your arms so that they don't get snagged. It was just really getting a functional basis for laying out your dive rig the way it was. And everyone who was there changed the way that they had their gear set up. We had hoses, we had elbows there so that everyone could reroute their hoses if they wanted to do it, and just get rid of a lot of crap. And you know, it really was bringing in, making it so that when you reach for something where your hand would naturally go, it's already there. And so this was, again, a really interesting side of things. So just by, you know, bringing in some of these you know, some of this training and some of these examples of getting to talk about it was already having an impact, given we weren't diving very much, but when it was, you know, it just changed the dialogue and, you know, changed it from, you know, you don't talk about stuff to, well, why don't we talk about it? Why don't we learn from it? So, you know, this was one of the very important things which I'd learned from Gareth's course about creating, you know, a psychologically safe environment. And this probably, you know, would be the pinnacle of contribution that has come into the club, of providing this psychologically safe environment, because we did have an incident. And again, you know, it was an incident, it wasn't an accident, but we had an incident where some of those divers were diving in this trying to do a slack water dive when that huge tidal volume was moving out of the bay. And they dallied around a little bit too long on the boat, and when they got in, the current was absolutely raging, went down, and they got very, very far separated from the boat. When they came up, and you know, they were, you know, the boat they jumped off was out of sight. Fortunately, they got picked up pretty soon by another boat, and the whole situation got resolved pretty quickly. But you know, there were some complexities around it. The boat that picked them up didn't have a functioning radio, which is not the end of the world because we're within mobile phone distance. But, you know, and this is something we hadn't thought of. When you jump off a dive boat, nobody dials their phones anymore. They just speed dial. I dived off a boat all summer, and the guy I dived with is a really good friend of mine. He's just a speed dial on my phone. So they could not provide the mobile phone number to call the boat to let them know that they were safe and being picked up. And this is probably a pretty Australian story. The boat owner of the guy who picked them up was obviously had a little bit of history and was not so keen to be phoning 000, the water police. In actual fact, eventually they all connected up, and he dropped the divers off at the pier and cleared up pretty quickly before the police turned up. So who knows what was going on there. But it was, you can imagine for the boat owner, this was a really traumatic experience. Okay, it all turned out okay, but for 10, 15, 20 minutes, he was wondering if he's just lost 2 divers. And he was really, quite upset by it. It absolutely freaked him out. And so afterwards, this did not get buried. He phoned me up. We had a talk about it. Then I actually ended up speaking with the divers. I asked him, would he be willing to present what happened at a club meeting? And we had a full club debrief. And I can tell you, it wasn't the easiest meeting for many of the 2 divers were there. We kept them completely anonymous. We said, it's up to you if you want to talk. It doesn't really matter who you are. What we want to do is figure out what happened, what were the things that we could have done better, and figure out, how to improve and change things. And there were a few things straight away. We started bringing in tags where you make sure you have the boat name, call sign, phone number before you jump off a boat, so that you can always make that connection. And then there were, another number of aspects around his boat that he had looked at and said, look, this is the way I've got this set up is not right. And he was about to fix it. Obviously, the powers that be had a bigger vision, because a few weeks later his boat was swamped and ended up on the bottom of the ocean and totaled. So he never did get to reconfigure it, but I'm pretty sure he would have done it. So where does this all come back to? And again, I feel that the buddy check is just such a good surrogate for talking about human factors and talking about how you do things, and because it is prone to this normalization of deviance of, eventually you go out, you don't have an incident, and you think, well, and you get slack, and you just reinforce this poor behavior. And it was really interesting. So, I started looking up to learn a little bit more and get stuff ready for this. And when you talk about normalization of deviance, it comes up with all the stuff you'd expect. The Challenger, safety, aviation, in healthcare. I think anyone who was on Gareth's introduction talk will have, heard him talking about, in operating theatres. Obviously, the whole human factors becomes absolutely critical. And so, normalization of deviance is well recognized and talked about, and it's a thing. Yeah. But it's not actually, that's an explanation for what goes wrong. What we actually want to create is this, and I was just quite amazed, this doesn't exist. Normalization of adherence. You look it up, and as you can see, this is adherence to a gluten-free diet. There's nothing about creating that culture where it's absolutely normal to be doing the right thing. And I think that's, for the dive club, that's going to be one of the most powerful ways of doing it. It's because I don't think you can do this by rules. There was a lot of talk of, well, we're going to make sure that people do this and do that, etc. I think if you implement anything via rules, the compliance is only for the rules. And what you want is, you want people to do the right thing because it is the right thing, and it's the normal thing to do. And so you want, you don't want to say to everyone, you must do a buddy check before you jump on. You want someone to say, feels a bit weird if I don't, and that way you will get, you'll get the Barrett Blakes. Barrett Blake can sit there and say, well, I'm going to tell everyone to shut up. I don't want lists, all of that. That's fine. Do your own thing. I can't tell you what to do. But if you're on a boat and everyone there is systematically going through all their gear before they go in, and you know that these people are really very experienced, and that's the way you do it, eventually that is how you're going to change it, and that's how you're going to bring it in. Because I can tell you, with the diversity of people you have on board, trying to tell them what to do, it's not going to happen. You have to change the behavior, and you have to change that culture. And I think what we should strive for is normalization of adherence. It's normal for us to do the right thing, and it's kind of feels a bit weird when we don't. And hopefully, when we do come out of these lockdowns and the sun's shining and we're back in the water, we will get a lot of opportunities to normalize that adherence. So I think that's pretty much where I finished up. This is again very early morning. It's one of the slackwater dives along that channel that I pointed out, and we were just watching very cautiously to see the current drop down so we could all roll in. And I can tell you, if you ever do come to Melbourne, the diving here is quite spectacular, and there's some really great adventures to be had. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions. I think I've finished in 30 minutes, so there's plenty of time to chat and explore this a bit further if anyone's interested.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to switch on your microphones. You're welcome to switch on your video and ask any questions of our speakers. So
Laura has a question.
Laura, please.
Yes. All right. Can you hear me? Is that all?
Yes,
I
we can hear you.
Laura. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Hi, Matthijs. It's good to see you.
Laura was another great person who put up a hand to come and speak at our dive club during our perpetual lockdown.
Yeah, I'm really so sorry to hear you're still in lockdown again. I hadn't even realised Melbourne was back in lockdown for so long. I actually don't have a very clear question, but I just wanted to come up and say thank you because I really, really enjoyed that presentation. I really like how your presentation reflected like real life, like really kind of being part of a dive club and having to deal with all the people and trying to kind of put these things into place. And that for me kind of resonates with my experience as well, you know, that it is messy and it is difficult and it is uncomfortable sometimes. And I really like your story about the wooden weight belt award and how that kind of ties into your kind of point at the end, how sometimes we so much are drawn to feed the things that we don't want with attention. Even though it's negative attention, we're feeding and reinforcing the things that we don't want, and how we then move that to feeding and reinforcing what we do want, the normal behavior, but that good behavior is often kind of boring and it doesn't get much attention. So and that kind of just feeds into your point about normalizing adherence as well. I'm not sure I can formulate a question, but I just wanted to kind of comment on that and say how useful it was to think about just how we do this in a messy environment and how uncomfortable it is sometimes to make those changes, and how, you know, and that being difficult. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And look at it, you know, I mean, on this, in fact, it may have been on this particular dive that this photo was taken on, but you know, the slackwater dives that we do on the bay on this, they are actually technically pretty challenging dives. You know, you really have to get your timing absolutely right, which means, you know, you have to have your shit together basically, and because you've got a 20 or 30 minute window, and if you get it and the current's all wrong, you know, you can separate very quickly. And we did 2 dives, in fact 3 dives, and I'd say all of them had challenges. On the first one that I went in, the current was raging. I was watching the line and I was swimming, you know, I was just absolutely fixated because if I stopped, I was going to get out of visibility of the descent line. And so I got to the bottom of it and turned around, and my dive buddy was nowhere to be seen. And I'd been so fixated on getting there that I'd lost it. Second time, I tried to do it a lot better, and I exhausted that dive buddy. And then the third time, her and I stuck together, and we separated from a third person. So there was a lot of things. But it was interesting when I was trying to talk about this, and I said, oh, you know, we were supposed to find Ian on the bottom, and we didn't find Ian. And she was like, no, don't say that. Don't say that. And so, why not? That's what happened, you know. But there was a sort of subtext of, well, you know, you shouldn't leave somebody separated like that, and you know. But the reality is, you have to get over that, and particularly if you know. I guess I'm fortunate in my diving style. I do create a lot of learning opportunities, probably a little bit too many. But, you know, you bring them up, and when you start talking about them and discussing them in front of people, that's when you really change. And you know, hopefully you don't make the same mistake twice. And if you got away with it the first time and didn't have it, and then you learn the lesson, it's brilliant. And if I can learn off someone else's errors, you know, even better from that. And it has the mentality is slowly changing, that this isn't something to be ashamed of. This is something to say, all right, how can the whole club benefit from that rather than just the individual?
Yeah. No, that's great. Sorry, thank you for kind of replying and thinking that's exactly what I mean. That kind of how we create that room for discomfort, and it is uncomfortable to raise these things, but how can we make that easier? So I just love listening to you, because you're doing that real environment and kind of what that actually feels like and how genuinely messy and difficult it can be.
I am very lucky that I have a club that's receptive to this, because I do know of another club. In fact, many of our members have come from that because they don't like it, where if you start talking about safety, you just get shut down. I mean, they just literally do not want to hear about it. And if you start raising any, you don't worry about that, mate. And so that's many of our members have come to our club because they don't feel comfortable with it, and some of the ones in our club have gone over there because they prefer a slightly looser style and just like to go bash and craze. So it is that dynamic.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah,
You have another question. We're going to take Chris T.
No, hi Matthijs. Thanks ever so much for the presentation. I thought it was excellent. You've kind of almost answered my question, but I wonder if you can go into a bit more detail. There's quite often I find there's significant pushback from people who go, "Oh, I don't really need this. I'm fine." How have you managed that within your club? What process have you put in place that sort of encouraged people to sort of pick up human factors?
It's just that we so what I would say is that a lot of the people, when they object with silence. There's you have to be pretty brave if you're in a club that's motto is safety and diving to say, well, that's safe, but we don't like it. It's probably not going to be you're not going to be invited on many boats. But so like I say, I am very lucky that I have an environment that's open to that. But I do watch what's going on, and you notice some people who protest it's I just look away and ignore that, and that doesn't concern me. And that's why I think you do have to get the only way to do it is by having enough people doing the right thing that it feels odd not to be doing it.
Right.
But to give you an example, I mean, it hasn't all gone brilliantly, and I would say I'm responsible for some of it not going as well. One of the things I was really, really keen to do, and I am still very keen to do, is bring in dive briefings on absolutely every dive, and it doesn't need to be a big song and dance. It's just, well, what did we do, and was there anything we could have done a bit better, and just like a couple of minutes. But finding the time to do that, and particularly on these days that we're out there, you're out there, you're diving, you're going back in, the whole focus is trying to get through the heads and navigate the waters, and sometimes it can be quite a rough ride getting back. And then you get back to the car park, or get to the boat ramp, it's 4 o'clock. It's all about getting the boat out, getting it washed down, getting your gear, all this kind of stuff. And we haven't actually found the right time slot where, and then you just want to get home. It's 4 o'clock, it's a 2-hour drive home, and you're going to have to wash your gear when you get back there. And I haven't actually found the time in that process where everyone's in the right headspace to be open and have a debrief. And I think the club, I think most of the members are actually really in favor of it in principle, but finding the reality of, you finish your dive, you just want to pack up and get home, and finding that space I've found has been quite difficult. And it's even more difficult if you haven't been out there much. But I haven't solved that one yet. And I've been pulled up by, the other guy who was on the course saying, well, you talked about all these dive briefs, but we've never done one yet. So, there's still plenty of work to be done. But, the people are receptive to it. We'll just see how I go over the next couple of years. It's not something you can change. You can't change it quickly, and I think you have to change it organically. I just feel bringing it in with rules is you're never going to get. You don't have the real organic buy-in and change that's going to be perpetuated. People will do it because they have to, and if people have to do something, generally as soon as they don't have to do it, they just don't do it because that's you've taken the gas off.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so
Very
much.
nice.
It's really good.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, fantastic. Chris, we haven't. I'm sorry, Brian. Chris T has another question,
It's, Seb
and
C's
and so
turn.
does Seb C. Yeah,
Is it my turn?
It
yeah,
is,
Seb, Mr. Seb.
Thank you. Sorry, is it Matthias?
Matthijs, yes.
Matthias, no, I thought we'll get that then. Thanks, it was great. I wanted to ask, what have you found to be the most inclusive communications tools for the club?
Within the club?
Within the club, yes. I saw. I think some of the slides you showed Facebook and public access, but in terms of communicating to members who may have just joined this year to ones who joined back in 1976 and everyone in between, without introducing multiple new platforms that some of the older members might be resistant to, what have you found the sort of most inclusive way to not just the human factors, but to communicate in general with club members, if it's okay for me to ask?
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? So one of the benefits of COVID is we've started using Zoom. And it is actually, and I'm a Luddite. Like, everyone tried to get me to do Zoom, and I said, mate, telephones work fine. We don't need this stuff. Anyway, because of COVID, we no longer could have our face-to-face meetings. We migrated to Zoom, and it is. We have people who are spread over a very wide area. It's transformed the club, and the older members are the ones who love it because they wouldn't drive, 50 Ks to come to a club meeting and then go back. And we started to get, we could get Gareth along, we could get Laura along, we could get international speakers to come and present at our dive club. And it has actually made the dynamic really, really work well. And we've only managed to have 3 live meetings since March last year. We had our first one in April this year. But the Zoom component had been such an important thing that we have hybrid meetings, and we have a big television up on the wall, and we've got the dynamic going that the people on the Zoom call are in the room and they're having the same banter and same discussion as everyone else. And it has changed that club dynamic to be the same old people who always turn up to the pub on Thursday night to really being the whole club. It has been a great thing.
Brilliant, thank you. Appreciate the presentation.
But I would like to add 2 more things, which is we also do have a club magazine, and that's a really important part of the DNA of the club. We have a club meeting. It's called Fathoms. We put it out every 2 months, and it's just it keeps the club very much together.
Very good. Thank you, Seb.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Up next, Chris W.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Matthijs. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
One of the, and I'm in lockdown as well. I'm in New Zealand, so I feel your pain. And my son lives in Melbourne.
Whereabouts are you? I'm an ex-Kiwi.
Yeah. I'm in Auckland, so just locked down as well. So enjoying
I did
that.
My first driving certificate down in Dunedin, so that's brave.
Cool. Yeah, what I was going to just observe was that in my own dive club that I dive with occasionally, I dive with a variety of different organisations. But there's a tension between the guys that just want to go and as you said a little bit earlier, bash craze, and those of us that just want to sort of go and take photos and observe from a distance. Have you had that sort of tension in your club, and how have you gone about resolving it if it's there?
We have a real variety of people in our club. So we have people who mainly do caves in South Australia, and they occasionally jump in the ocean, but they prefer cave diving. We have guys who do wreck diving. We have people who love macro photography, and we also have the hunter-gatherers. And there hasn't really been any tension. Everyone kind of is happy with what they do. So we haven't really had a conflict. There's,
Okay.
respect. I'll tell you one interesting thing though, which we had an event in May, in February, where we dived a site called the Pinnacles, which was again an absolutely spectacular dive site. It's not a marine reserve, but it is a very, very special place. And the guy who took us there probably has dived it 500 plus times, and it's his own thing. And he had organised this event, and he did ask, look, it isn't a marine park, but as part of this club dive, we're going to ask that nobody touches any crays and nobody touches any of the wildlife. And a few people were said, oh, bugger, I came here to get a few crays. I said, well, you just have to respect Peter's wishes. He's hosting this event, and he's, giving us the privilege of his experience here. And they all said, all right, well, that's fair enough. And I don't think they came back the next day. You never know. But yeah, generally there's been quite a bit of respect for what everyone else does. But some of the other clubs I think are a little bit more gung ho.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Super nice. I do have a question for you. In your dive club, are there any disciplinary procedures if somebody doesn't follow your let's say rules, your codes of conduct?
Absolutely, yes. We have the bylaws and rules book have a pretty extensive process. I've never seen anyone start going through that, but it is there. So the club is. We're a pretty active club, and it's not like, so we have committee meetings every month, and we have a club meeting every month as well, and it would get dealt with at the committee level. And if it was a serious breach, particularly something where it was endangering people's lives or boats and their equipment, and it was negligent, there would be intervention, ultimately having them leave the club.
Okay, good. Fantastic. Thank you. And there's one more question before we wrap up, and that's from Philip.
Hi, Philip.
Hiya. I've a really interesting talk. What's funny for me is I've not dived in the club for years, and I've only recently dived the club. And I'm still finding my way in the attitudes of the people in the club. But yeah, the thing, the sort of changes you've made, you sort of said about the getting rid of the wooden weight belt is like, and that's kind of that sort of embarrassing item sort of thing. I can remember that from being in clubs years ago where they had some, especially on trips, they had some sort of punishment thing for if you did stuff, and that kind of rung very true with me. But I wanted to just sort of ask, did you sort of made that change after you became club president, did you say?
Pretty well, it was actually a little bit before that. So I've been on the committee and it was coming up, and fortunately one of the other guys and I said, well, I just don't think we should award it this year, and I think we should get rid of it. And I don't know why they listened to me, but they did. Like I say, you do feel a bit of a killjoy. We just had our annual general meeting this week on Tuesday, and I kind of said, well, I know I got rid of it, but I bet nobody else could beat me with this entry if we had it. So I kind of tried to keep that dynamic all happening.
I think, I was just kind of, you've kind of answered my question. I was sort of, wondering whether you'd sort of campaigned to become president by sort of saying, I want to change things and make a different attitude, or whether it was already sort of something people knew about and you'd already sort of decided to make the change.
Really? I became president because the other guy was destroying the club. And then this just sort of became something I was passionate about, and thought, well, I'm going to make it. this is how I'm going to make an impact on the club.
Yeah. No,
Really
I think
nice.
it really sort of resonates with me, because there's this sort of attitude that I found in clubs of that sort of, oh, we'll embarrass people and that will stop them making errors, and it just never happened. It never worked. There'd always be somebody who would end up with this embarrassment, and like you say, I think it's better to sort of create an honest environment where people go, yeah, I've done this, and people go, well, okay, we'll learn from it. So
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I've got no shame, so I screw up all the time, and I just get up there and say, guess what, I've screwed up again, you know, and it was leading by example, or misleading by example. I don't know what you call it, but I just thought, right, why not just talk about it? So
Okay, so I don't mean to interrupt both of you. Well, I do have to interrupt both of you.
no, but it's great to get. By the way, it's just fantastic to get feedback, and thank you very much for all the questions, because it sort of makes me feel like it's resonated with people.
Well,
so thank you.
all of these questions can still continue. All of the people who are participating in the audience, you are welcome to meet our speaker. If you go back to the lobby floor, there's an area where you can meet the last Hall 2 presenter, the last Hall 2 speaker. So I invite all of you to go there, including our speaker, so that you can ask any other questions.
Okay. Do I move myself, or do you move me?
Yes, you move yourself there,
I move myself.
as far as I know. And at the top of the hour, we have our next presenter. So I look forward to anybody who's going